Chapter 9 of the Backwoods of Canada by Catherine Parr Traill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Backwoods of Canada by Catherine Parr Traill. Letter 9. The Loss of a Yoke of Oxen. Lake House, April 18th, 1833. But it is time that I should give you some account of our log house, into which we moved a few days before Christmas, many unlooked for delays having hindered its completion before that time. I began to think it would never be habitable. The first misfortune that happened was the loss of a fine yoke of oxen that were purchased to draw in the house logs, that is, the logs for raising the walls of the house. Not regarding the bush as pleasant as their former masters' cleared pastures, or perhaps foreseeing some hard work to come, early one morning they took into their heads to ford the lake at the head of the rapids and march off, leaving no trace of their route excepting their footing at the water's edge. After many days spent in vain search for them, the work was at a stand, and for 1 month they were gone, and we began to give up all expectation of hearing any news of them. At last we learned they were some 20 miles off, in a distant township, having made their way through bush and swamp, creek and lake, back to their former owner, with an instinct that supplied to them the want of roads and compass. Oxen have been known to traverse a tract of wild country to a distance of 30 or 40 miles, going in a direct line for their former haunts by unknown paths, where memory could not avail them. In the dog we consider it is scent as well as memory that guides him to his far off home. But how is this conduct of the oxen to be accounted for? They returned home through the mazes of interminable forests, where man, with all his reason and knowledge, would have been bewildered and lost. It was the latter end of October before even the walls of our house were up. To effect this we called a bee. 16 of our neighbours cheerfully obeyed our summons, and though the day was far from favourable, so faithfully did our hive perform their tasks, that by night the outer walls were raised. The work went merrily on with the help of plenty of Canadian nectar, whisky, the honey that our bees are solaced with, some huge joints of salt pork, a peck of potatoes, with a rice pudding, and a loaf as big as an enormous Cheshire cheese, formed the feast that was to regale them during the raising. This was spread out in the shanty in a very rural style. In short, we laughed and called it a picnic in the backwoods. And rude as the fare, I can assure you great was the satisfaction expressed by all the guests of every degree, our bee being considered as very well conducted. In spite of the difference of rank among those that assisted at the bee, the greatest possible harmony prevailed, and the party separated well pleased with the day's work and entertainment. The following day I went to survey the newly raised edifice, but was sorely puzzled, as it presented very little appearance of a house. It was merely an oblong square of logs raised one above the other, with open spaces between every row of logs. The spaces for the doors and windows were not then chopped out, and the rafters were not up. In short, it looked a very queer sort of place, and I returned home a little disappointed, and wondering that my husband should be so well pleased with the progress that had been made. A day or two after this I again visited it. The sleepers were laid to support the floors, and the places for the doors and windows cut out of the solid timbers, so that it had not quite so much the look of a birdcage as before. After the roof was shingled we were again at a stand, as no boards could be procured nearer than Peterborough, a long day's journey through horrible roads. At that time no sawmill was in progress. Now there is a fine one building within a little distance of us. Our flooring boards were all to be sawn by hand, and it was some time before any one could be found to perform this necessary work, and that at high wages, 6 and 6d. per day. Well, the boards were at length down, but of coarse unseasoned timber, This was unavoidable. So as they could not be planed, we were obliged to put up with their rough unsightly appearance, for no better were to be had. I began to recall to mind the observation of the old gentleman with whom we travelled from Cobourg to Rice Lake. We console ourselves with the prospect that by next summer the boards will be all seasoned, and then the house is to be turned topsy turvy, by having the floors all relaid, jointed, and smoothed. The next misfortune that happened was, that the mixture of clay and lime that was to plaster the inside and outside of the house between the chinks of the logs was one night frozen to stone. Just as the work was about half completed, the frost suddenly setting in, put a stop to our proceeding for some time, as the frozen plaster yielded neither to fire nor to hot water, the latter freezing before it had any effect on the mass, and rather making bad worse. Then the workman that was hewing the inside walls to make them smooth, wounded himself with the broad axe, and was unable to resume his work for some time. I state these things merely to show the difficulties that attend us in the fulfilment of our plans, and this accounts in a great measure for the humble dwellings that settlers of the most respectable description are obliged to content themselves with at first coming to this country, not, you may be assured, from inclination, but necessity. I could give you such narratives of this kind as would astonish you. After all, it serves to make us more satisfied than we should be on casting our eyes around to see few better off than we are, and many not half so comfortable, yet of equal, and, in some instances, superior pretensions as to station and fortune. Every man in this country is his own glazier. This you will laugh at; but if he does not wish to see and feel the discomfort of broken panes, he must learn to put them in his windows with his own hands. Workmen are not easily to be had in the backwoods when you want them, and it would be preposterous to hire a man at high wages to make 2 days' journey to and from the nearest town to mend your windows. Boxes of glass of several different sizes are to be bought at a very cheap rate in the stores. My husband amused himself by glazing the windows of the house preparatory to their being fixed in. To understand the use of carpenter's tools, I assure you, is no despicable or useless kind of knowledge here. I would strongly recommend all young men coming to Canada to acquire a little acquaintance with this valuable art, as they will often be put to great inconvenience for the want of it. I was once much amused with hearing the remarks made by a fine lady, the reluctant sharer of her husband's emigration, on seeing the son of a naval officer of some rank in the service busily employed in making an axe handle out of a piece of rock elm. "I wonder that you allowed George to degrade himself so," she said, addressing his father. The captain looked up with surprise. "Degrade himself! In what manner, madam? My boy neither swears, drinks whisky, steals, nor tells lies." "But you allow him to perform tasks of the most menial kind. What is he now better than a hedge carpenter? And I suppose you allow him to chop too?" "Most assuredly I do. That pile of logs in the cart there was all cut by him after he had left study yesterday," was the reply. "I would see my boys dead before they should use an axe like common labourers." "Idleness is the root of all evil," said the captain. "How much worse might my sons be employed if he were running wild about the streets with bad companions!" "You will allow this is not a country for gentlemen or ladies to live in," said the lady. "It is the country for gentlemen that will work and cannot live without, to starve in," replied the captain bluntly; "and for that reason I make my boys early accustom themselves to be usefully and actively employed." "My boys shall never work like common mechanics," said the lady indignantly. "Then, madam, they will be good for nothing as settlers, and it is a pity you drag them across the Atlantic." "We were forced to come. We could not live as we had been used to do at home, or I never would have come to this horrid country." "Having come hither, you would be wise to conform to circumstances. Canada is not the place for idle folks to retrench a lost fortune in. In some parts of the country you will find most articles of